There's a reason Knights of the Old Republic 2 has stayed with me longer than the first game has. Not because it's bigger or more polished, because it isn't, and not because it offers clearer answers, it absolutely doesn't. It's because KOTOR 2 feels like a game that expects more from you. More reflection, more discomfort, more patience. Where the first KOTOR game gives you a galaxy on the brink of collapse, KOTOR 2 gives you a galaxy that's already been broken and asks you to walk through the consequences. I love the first game, but KOTOR 2 is the one I keep thinking about. Because it isn't a story about choosing the right side, it's a story about what belief does to people, and what happens when faith, ideology, and power collide. The first KOTOR game begins with clarity. The Republic is fragile but hopeful. The Jedi are flawed but noble. The Sith are dangerous but identifiable. KOTOR 2 removes all of that certainty. From the moment you step into its world, everything feels exhausted. The Republic still exists, but it's barely holding itself together. The Jedi aren't guiding the galaxy, they're hiding from it. And the Sith aren't conquerors anymore, they're scavengers. This is a galaxy shaped by aftermath. Wars have been fought, ideals have failed, and the people living here aren't waiting for heroes anymore. They're trying to survive the damage left behind them. That tone is what immediately sets KOTOR 2 apart. It's quieter, heavier, and less interested in spectacle, and I think that's intentional. Unlike the first game's protagonist, the exile doesn't arrive as a blank slate destined for greatness. You arrive as someone marked by failure. Your part isn't something to be discovered, it's something everyone else has already judged. You didn't just fight in the Mandalorian Wars, you made a choice, and that choice rippled outward in ways you'll never fully control. What KOTOR 2 does brilliantly is mirror the exile's story with the galaxy itself. Both are survivors of ideology, both are carrying wounds that belief systems left behind. You're not rebuilding a legend, you're navigating the wreckage of one. At the heart of KOTOR 2 is Kreia, not as a villain, not as a hero, but as a challenge. Kreia isn't interested in light or dark. She's interested in dependence. Her philosophy isn't that the Jedi are wrong and the Sith are right. It's that both rely on absolutes that strip people of agency. Kreia questions the Force itself, not as a mystical energy, but as a system of control. And what makes Kreia so effective isn't that she's always right. It's that the game lets her argue with you seriously. She reacts to your choices, she critiques your compassion as much as your cruelty, and she rarely gives you the satisfaction of moral certainty. I don't agree with Kreia, but I respect how the game allows her to exist without simplifying her. She's persuasive, and that's what makes her dangerous.
Cruelty leads to suffering. And when one suffers, it is the way of life to spread suffering. The suffering within builds until its sound is all one hears, and when a kindness is offered, it is punished. And a greater darkness is served. From one act can come tremendous power when the echo has traveled as far as it can. Send a great echo, and power will come to you. The day shall come when you can test your strength, I promise you.
One of the reasons I enjoy KOTOR 2 more than the first game is how uncomfortable it is with choice. In KOTOR, doing good often feels rewarding. In KOTOR 2, doing good can feel naive. Helping someone might make things worse. Intervening might create dependence. walking away might be the least harmful option, or the most selfish. The game rarely tells you which outcome is correct. It lets consequences unfold quietly. This is where ideology becomes a burden rather than a guide. KOTOR II doesn't ask, are you light side or dark side? It asks, what happens after you act? Your companions aren't just party members. Their response is to belief. Aton is shaped by guilt and avoidance. Baldur is defined by responsibility and regret. The Handmaiden wrestles with loyalty versus independence. Mira and Hanha represent freedom and bondage in extreme forms. And through influence, you don't just affect what they believe, you affect who they become. A Jedi or a Sith. That's a powerful idea. You're not guiding them towards alignment points, you're shaping how they understand themselves. And sometimes that feels a bit unsettling.
Very well, but mind what I have said. Use your power, but in its proper place.
One of the boldest choices KOTOR II makes, in my opinion, is how it portrays the Jedi. They're not wise mentors anymore. They're not guiding forces. They're afraid. Afraid of the Force, afraid of responsibility, afraid of being wrong again. And instead of confronting the galaxy they helped damage, they withdraw. KOTOR II doesn't hate the Jedi. It critiques what happened when institutions value preservation over accountability. This isn't presented as villainy, it's presented as a weakness. And that feels uncomfortably human for a game made this long ago. When you finally encounter the remaining members of the Jedi Council, there's no sense of relief, no feeling that order has been restored. Instead, it feels like you've walked into a room full of people who are trying to justify their own retreat. They don't ask how the galaxy is suffering, they ask whether you are dangerous. To me, that moment says everything. The Jedi in KOTOR II don't see themselves as guardians anymore. They see themselves as potential mistakes. And rather than face the damage they helped create, they withdraw from the galaxy entirely. You can see this in the way they respond to the exile. They don't treat you as someone shaped by war. They treat you as a threat to their control. When they decide to sever you from the Force, it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like fear disguised as principle. What makes this so powerful is that the game doesn't portray them as villains. There's no dramatic reveal, no evil monologue. They genuinely believe they're protecting the galaxy. But in doing so, they refuse to take responsibility, take accountability for the role they played in shaping it. They abandoned the Republic. They abandoned the people who depended on them. And then they convinced themselves that isolation was wisdom. To me, Knights of the Old Republic 2 isn't saying the Jedi are evil. It's suggesting that institutions can fail not through malice, but through self-preservation. When protecting the idea of the Order becomes more important than protecting the people it was meant to serve, something fundamental has broken. And that's what makes this portrayal feel so human. The Jedi don't fall because they are corrupted. They fall because they are afraid to change. The subtitle of the game, The Sith Lords, is definitely intentional with its undeniable focus. The Sith Lords in KOTOR II aren't emperors, they aren't conquerors, they aren't even traditional villains. They're symptoms. They exist not because they built something powerful, but because everything around them is already collapsing. They feed on wounds, on fear, on absence. When you encounter Nihilus, he doesn't rule through authority, he consumes. His presence feels less like a tyrant and more like a void. Scion is the same. He isn't sustained by belief or loyalty, but by pain and stubborn survival. These aren't leaders, they're consequences. They only exist because belief systems failed to protect the galaxy. Where the Jedi withdrew, the Sith filled the space left behind, not with vision, but with hunger. What makes this version of the Sith so unsettling is that they don't promise a future. They don't even pretend to build one. They hollow out what remains. You can see this in the worlds they touch. Everything feels drained, unstable, and forgotten. They aren't trying to replace the Republic. They're feeding on its decay. To me, this makes them more disturbing than traditional villains. They don't conquer the galaxy, they let it rot. And in that sense, KOTOR II frames the Sith not as an opposing ideology, but as what happens when the ideology collapses entirely. They aren't the opposite of the Jedi, they're the shadow left behind when belief loses its meaning. And that's why they feel less like characters, and more like manifestations of a broken system. They don't represent power, they represent what happens when power has nothing left to believe in. I love KOTOR I for its structure, its pacing, its clarity, but KOTOR II resonates with me because it feels honest about uncertainty. It doesn't offer a satisfying ideological endpoint. It doesn't tell you what to believe. It trusts you to sit with unresolved ideas. That's rare, especially in games, and it's why, despite its flaws, KOTOR II feels more ambitious, more thoughtful, and more challenging. KOTOR II remains relevant because it doesn't pretend power is clean. It questions institutions without glorifying rebellion. It critiques belief without offering nihilism as an answer. In a world where people are increasingly skeptical of systems, KOTOR II feels less like a Star Wars story and more like a conversation about responsibility. Not who deserves power, but who should be trusted with it. Knights of the Old Republic 2 isn't a comfortable game. It's uneven, sometimes unfinished, often messy, but it's also bold. It dares to ask questions without promising answers. It challenges ideology without pretending neutrality. And it respects the player enough to let discomfort linger. I enjoy KOTOR 2 more than the first game, not because it's better in every way, but because it's braver in the ways that matter to me. It doesn't ask me to be a hero, it asks me to think, and that's why I keep coming back to it.